And now, our feature contemplation.
Speaking of Cinema with Andrew Schwartz.
Welcome, everyone, to the inaugural Speaking Cinema podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Schwartz, and today we are going to say cheese because we're talking about the chilling classic from 2022, 2 years ago, Smile. And today we have a really fun guest, and hopefully we get to talk about many movies in the future with him. My friend, my colleague, and a great guy all around, Jon Bewley. He's a producer, and he is a director, and he's a cinematographer. Jon, thanks for coming on the podcast with us.
Of course, Andrew. It's really nice to be on here on the first episode. It's really it's really touching, and it really means a lot to me that I was one of the first people you contacted to be on this.
Oh, easy choice, man. Easy choice. So today we're talking about a horror movie. And we don't always talk about horror movies here. We're going to talk about every sort of genre, every type of film, all different running times, different lengths, different styles. But today's film is really exciting because I personally love horror. I've made horror films myself. Jon and I have collaborated on horror films. So this is a really nice little niche category for us to talk about. And this film really made quite an impression. And it still is doing quite well. So what I'd like to do is get right into it. And if for all the listeners, if you need to know what this podcast is, we've got a nice little 3 or 4 minute introduction episode that you can listen to. So I would recommend listening to that to get all the details of what this podcast is. But really, really fast, this is a podcast that's not necessarily a movie review podcast. It's not a podcast about what we personally thought about how good or not good the movie is, right? This is a unique podcast in which we're taking a look under the hood, and we're looking at the meaning that's embedded in the film. We're trying to deconstruct it, we're having fun with it, and we are taking what we can from the movie in terms of what it means for the culture, not necessarily what it means for the movie business, although that can be part of this, but we're talking about what it means for the culture, what it means to us personally, why these movies affect us so much. So that's really what we're talking about. And Jon and I are going to take our best shot at Smile. So I hope everyone enjoys. So, first, log lines. We don't hear much about log lines. And for those of you that are just joining us or not quite familiar with what a log line is, that's going to be that simple 1 or 2 sentence description of the movie, right, that you're going to see on streaming channels, on Netflix or Hulu or whatever it is when you highlight the movie and it just tells you what it is, or on IMDb when it's going to give you that first little bit of summary information on the movie. So these are important for promotional reasons, and I'm fascinated by log lines. And I like talking about log lines with my filmmaking colleagues. And let's take a crack at the log line, Jon. After witnessing a bizarre, traumatic incident involving a patient, a psychiatrist becomes increasingly convinced she's being threatened by an uncanny entity. Ooh. So, Jon, what do you think of this log line? Does it encapsulate the film? Does it not? Why?
Yeah, it definitely encapsulates the entity of the film. It's like any good logline. It's straightforward. It's to the point. It's a summary of a film in one concise sentence, and there really is an art form to the logline, and it's still very important in our industry today. So I think it nails it.
Yeah, I think it does too. It's quite straightforward. Sometimes it's kind of funny, right? We see log lines sometimes for movies that are, whether the movie is sort of maybe it's a bizarre movie or it's some sort of alternative genre movie or a genre bender or something. It's difficult to describe. Or sometimes it is a rather normal movie, right? And the log line will say something that is just so off base, right? And it says something that's more or less you would say, oh, well, that's maybe the first 5 minutes of the movie, right? Or that's a little piece of the movie that I wouldn't even consider to be very important. So it is funny to me. Sometimes log lines just go off into their own little world, and we have no idea why they would choose that to be the promotional sentence that describes the movie. But yeah, psychiatrist becomes increasingly convinced she's being threatened by an uncanny entity. So this one's very straightforward, very sort of, hey, this is a typical American horror film. We've got psychosis in here. There's a bizarre traumatic incident, and trauma is a big part of this, which we'll talk about. There's a patient, psychiatrist. These are sort of these, keywords that really give us kind of an idea that this is sort of a typical horror thriller from America, I would say, right? And our budget is $17 million. So we're thinking, hey, all right, this is sort of like a middle budget, right? It's almost low, actually. It's a mid-range budget, which we don't see too much anymore. But there's nothing in this logline that tells us, hey, we're going to see, a Marvel style, a Marvel level horror movie in here.
I will say, to interject, I
Sure.
did think it was really funny when I learned that this was a $17 million movie. Because I
Mhm.
went into this thinking that this was, I thought this was a Blumhouse film at first.
Mhm.
And it's still within that style. I think Blumhouse films have kind of become their own kind of mini genre in a way now. But when I was watching this, I was very surprised to find that this was a $17 million budget,
Mhm.
because it looks a lot closer to a it looked a lot closer to a $6 or $7 million budget.
Mhm.
And then you see that they shot on the Alexa 65, and you're like, well, all right,
Yeah.
that might explain a couple of the numbers there. But
Yeah.
also just
It does look
having
really good.
it looks
Yeah.
incredible, and also
Yeah.
having some recognizable name actors too in supporting roles. I mean, everyone in the cast is working for sure, but to see Cal Penn pop up in the role that he has, I'm sure Cal
Right.
Penn charges a pretty number for what he does. And also Jesse T. Usher as well. That's seeing him too. I mean,
Yeah.
he's on The Boys right now, so I mean he's doing very well.
Right.
And just to see this really good cast stacked out, you start to see where the numbers make sense.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. And it all does come together. And it's a really fun film. And it does look really good. And there is a lot of talent in here. I do think that some of the performances are stronger than others, right? But we'll talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, what I'd like to talk about next is, quite simply, while we're looking at introducing this film, the title. I want to do a title take. People generally also don't talk about titles, and I love talking about titles because it's a good way we can introduce the film. We could talk about if the title is good, if the title is bad, and why. And titles are very interesting in films, right? And books and novels and things like that as well, because the title is supposed to sort of give you this overarching idea or impression, not even necessarily what the story is sometimes, right? It can just give you an impression. Sometimes titles are promotional. Sometimes titles really are getting at the heart of what the story is about. But regardless, titles also can go through stages, right, in pre-production or in drafting. And in this case, in the case of Smile, our title was not the original title. We had an alternate title here, which was a working title, to be fair. So before the film was actually fully finished, the working title of the film was There's Something Wrong with Rose. So, yeah, what do you think about There's Something Wrong with Rose after seeing the movie, John? And why do you think they changed it?
Um, I don't want to delve into smarmy things, but it's like I heard that title and I thought that's just not a very good title for it. It doesn't tell me what the movie's about. It doesn't
Yeah.
really give me an image, and maybe I'm adhering a little too much to Blake Snyder's Save the Cat, which I know is it seems to be controversial amongst our friend group. Even though I think he's certainly a more it's a more digestible version of Joseph Campbell, if I'm being honest. But there's
Mm,
something that he said that really stuck with me, which is, if you want a good title for your film, you should try to encapsulate it. And I think he said within 5 words or less, you should try to encapsulate what the story of the film is about. And when you think of some pretty great films that have come along the way, and just certain films that were important to my journey as a filmmaker early on, as a kid, it's like, well, what's the movie about? It's about The Departed. It's about The Town. It's about The Ring. Um, those are three films that stick out to me, and it's like, that's what this film's about, and the title tells you explicitly. You know, Drive's another great example. Um, it's about a guy. What does he do? He drives. And to me, there's something wrong with Rose. Is a very. It's like they're not wrong. There is something wrong with her.
hmm
And if you go down the mental health trauma element of the film, then yeah, there is something wrong with her. But Smile is just so much more evocative because these people smile before they do something pretty horrific. And while the film is not about smiling, it's what the smile represents. I think that's a much more effective title. And it just allows for much more effective marketing too.
Yeah, agreed. And the funny thing about There's Something Wrong with Rose is uh, it reminds me of the 70s, right? It reminds me of these movies that have um, this very stark title that just tells you something that someone's feeling. There's something wrong with Rose. Rose went into the basement one day, and she came out different. Like that smoky 70s,
Mhm.
chain smoking movie trailer person telling you about Rose. And there's also that film Audrey Rose that kind of comes to mind, which is sort of like an exorcist from the 70s, an exorcist wannabe movie about this girl that's sort of reincarnated. And Rose just seems like a very sort of vintagey name from the 70s. So I don't know. It's just, I'm imagining a movie poster. Everyone has big hair, mustaches, sideburns, and there's something wrong with Rose, and we're trying to figure it out. And you should come to the theater to see us figure it out together. Something like that. So, um, but yeah, it's no wonder that they changed it. However, I'm wondering that I would love to have Parker on here, Parker Finn, the writer and director, because one thing that I would ask him is this title. Uh, it doesn't mention anything about smiling, right? It's the exact opposite of smile, right? It's smile is positive, it gives you a specific image, like you said, and there's something wrong with Rose is the polar opposite, right? It's the antithesis of what I think of when I hear there's something wrong with Rose. So I don't know if he just couldn't think of a title that um maybe this was so early along that the smile wasn't even a big part of the movie. Maybe it was just about trauma. I don't know what the past of it is, right? What the story of that is, but I would love to know that, right? Because it's just such a polar opposite. Now, I prepared a little thing about this. Smile. I think, John, this movie is very much about memes, right? This title is the meme of the movie. Okay? Meme is a word that was coined by Professor Richard Dawkins, an evolutionary biologist, in 1976 in his book The Selfish Gene. And the meme he was talking about a unit of culture, a unit of cultural importance that is copied and mimicked throughout the culture in the same way that genes are. Right? So he's likening a unit of cultural importance, like an image or something that is human related. Can be an action, like remember the dab, something like that that gets copied and survives in the so-called evolution of culture. Right? To me, this title it's a one-word title. I love one-word titles because they're easy to remember. right? They're simple. And this does encapsulate it, but it is the meme itself. In this movie, once you see this thing or you experience it, it wants to, or you want to, for some reason, you don't know why yet, you want to become it, right? And it wants to copy itself and move on from host to host, in a sense, right? So to me, this is almost like a meme being passed on physically from body to body. And I love just the simplicity of smile. Okay, it's like that Yao Ming meme, bitch please, or it's like you just call the movie the meme itself, right? And then of course we saw a lot of really clever promotional material for this movie, right? In fact, the only thing that a person has to do to promote this movie, anyone can do it, is to smile creepily at another person until they laugh uncomfortably and say, "What are you doing?" And they can say, "I am inside the movie Smile." Hey, that looks really terrifying and interesting. I want to see that movie, right? So the title is the meme, and I find that to be very interesting and work very well for the movie here. It works so well, John, that it almost makes me think, how did they name it anything else?
I think the answer could be as simple as, like you said, perhaps the writer and director was going for something more akin to a 70s title. Um, there's something
Yeah,
certainly a little different in the visual presence of the film too, because everything is shown off in these, much wider shots than a lot of filmmaking. Like I was surprised at how wide so many of the shots are. And a lot of 70s filmmaking is a lot wider. So they could have been going for a 70s title. Um, Sometimes the title comes from the distributor. One of our professors at college, he made a film and it had this very intelligent title, and the distributor said if you put a number in front of it, we can get it in front of like 100 more screens. And sometimes the marketing people do get it right. I think
yeah.
Smile, for what for this film, this is a brilliant title. Like I said, it gives you a very vivid image. It's a smile is generally a positive trait, and a smile in the wrong context is very unsettling. It makes you think of the smile that's quite creepy on all of these posters. And to go off of your meme analogy for a second and your thesis on that, they actually did that as part of their marketing campaign too for the film. There was a period where um, the cast went to, I don't know if it was one baseball game or multiple, but they went to a baseball game and they would consistently show up on the fan cam doing their creepy smile. And those images of them on the fan cams got turned into memes that were shared around social media. It was a very organic marketing campaign. So
Yeah.
it just in that alone, that I think that thesis certainly adds up.
Well,
I
thank
went a bit
you.
more of the I went more of the clinical route. Sorry to cut you off.
No,
Um,
go for it.
but I did go more of the clinical route on this, and that I think the film is ultimately about um, it's about experienced trauma and collective trauma, and how we can sometimes force our trauma onto other people. But I think there's enough room for multiple interpretations of that.
Oh, absolutely. I was talking more about sort of like how the title is oriented to the film, the meaning of the entire film itself. But I totally
Yep.
agree about, yeah, this is a film that is soaking wet with trauma and
Mhm.
everything that comes with trauma, everything that induces trauma, everything that replicates it and nurtures it. And yeah, we will definitely get into that because that is what this film is part and parcel about. For a horror movie like this small in budget to make its money back is nice enough, but it did surpass its budget. It made about 22.6 million on opening weekend. But then I think the proliferation of these images, and the spreading of these memes, right after opening weekend caused it to jump up to a huge $106 million gross in the U.S. and Canada, and a worldwide gross of $217.5 million. So for a little horror film like this, that is just phenomenal. It's a phenomenal performance. So using the meme to sell the film, I love that. It's just incredible. So, and it again, that is an aspect of what the film is about in and of itself. So it just underscores the entire idea. I just love that. So our lead character is Rose, right? She's a psychiatrist. She works at a hospital locally in Newark, New Jersey, which is where it was shot. And we're going to get into the opening of the film in just a second. But John, how do you think that Rose as a character encapsulates trauma elements? Because what I thought was this character really was, in a sense, the perfect analog for us to be placed in the movie, and to be that person that demonstrates to us all of the aspects of trauma. What are some of those aspects do you think that Rose is trying to give us in terms of the significance of trauma and placing it in the movie as a character? How do they do this successfully with Rose?
I mean, I think it was set up pretty straightforward. I mean, especially in the opening image of the scene. And I know we're going to talk about the opening image,
Yeah.
in the next one as well, but I think this ties into it. That is one hell of an opening image, seeing her dead mother on the bed, and especially what we learn later in the story about the significance of that scene and why we open with that scene. But regardless of the context, if you enter your bedroom or your mother's bedroom and find her dead on the bed, surrounded by drugs, implying that she took too many and had an overdose. I mean, I don't know. I could be wrong, but I feel like that's a hell of a thing that will stick with you for a long time, and that's going to require quite a bit of therapy. And what's interesting is she encapsulates this character who, on the surface and at her introduction, she was a person who experienced something traumatic in her lifetime and chose to help others work through her trauma. So she, in some ways, represents the negative sides of trauma and the positive sides of trauma in what she chose to do with her career. And
Right.
It lines that up nicely with the inciting incident of the film, because it would make sense that she would be placed into a traumatic incident that would kickstart this whole process.
Right. So you know what? You're absolutely right. And let's just go right into the opening, because I think we're both foaming at the mouth to talk about this opening image, because I also thought that the opening image was fantastic. I just, what things that I really noted about this were, I mean, I want to talk about just from the Paramount logo, okay? And really successful horror films, I think, do this, right? That for the entire running time, and even outside of the running time, in a sense, of what we see in the story, this film is working to put you in a trance, right? It's putting you in an emotional state, right? And it keeps you there, and it holds you there, because it really does a very effective job here of transferring you into the consciousness of this lead character, of Rose, right? And it has to hold you there, right? If it doesn't, then it loses the terror and the magic and the suspense. So right from that Paramount logo, there's the creepy score starts, the music. There's this breathy effect. There's a monster-like groaning sound, okay? Even right as we're going to the Temple Hill logo, which is the thing right after the Paramount logo. So, those little graphics come in, and I love when they start the score over those production company graphics, right? It just has a way of almost transcending the movie itself, right? It's like this is outside of even the world of the movie. That's how powerful this sense is and this feeling is. And then they have some electronic effects and metallic sounding things. They have pitch bending um, a little bit in here too, which is when that pitch isn't on a one direct flat note, one flat frequency. It's going to be pitched up like ooh, or like up or down like that. And that to me almost sounded like a smile, right? I mean, there's something creepy that horror films like to do with that anyway, but it's everything kind of dedicates to that meme, that traumatic meme, the smile. So I loved how they kind of ushered us in with that kind of a thing. And then you're right, we see this dead mother corpse, mouth open. I mean, the only thing it's missing are just flies and bugs coming out of her, right? It's a disgusting looking cold corpse. And it fills the screen from north to south, right? So that's immediately what we're seeing, right? And
Well,
then,
just to chime in real
mhm,
quick on that
yeah,
too, because you mentioned like all it's missing is the flies and everything. I'm actually gonna diverge from you there on that just briefly. I think it's actually more unsettling that there weren't flies and other signs of decay there, because that implies that this literally just happened. And it's like it is this immediate confrontation
well,
of
actually,
death,
mhm. Yeah, it's interesting
because
you say that
it's
because,
fresh and it sticks with you.
yeah, no, that's true, but and that's certainly valid. But what's interesting to me is, I think it's the full screen of her. She's looking at a square in the eyes, right? And then I think right before the camera starts to move away from her and pull away, there's like a synthy string sound, and it sounds like flies buzzing. I don't know if you remember that, but so even if we don't have the imagery
Interesting.
of that, yeah, even if we don't have the imagery of the flies buzzing, they put that synthy sound in there, and it gives you the sense that this is just sort of a grotesque, rotting scene. Um, and yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to me this kind of a shot, especially in the context of the story of the movie. It's frozen. It's sort of out of time, right? Because it's like you said, it's always fresh in her mind, and I completely agree with that. But I think what they give you is an emotional sort of effect with these flies buzzing sort of a sound. It's just you can almost smell the rancid rankness, right?
Hmm.
And as of the room, and as they pull out, they're dollying along, and we see all uh, these used clothes, right? These dirty clothes strewn about. We see the pills, right? And the camera's moving very slowly and carefully so that you can really take in everything. And that plus the score and very cold um, color grade, right? Extremely cold and extremely blue. It's just almost like a morgue. And it just gives you this extremely dense uh, feeling of morbidness. It's almost gothic, this opening image, right? And then we move the camera up to the top of a dresser, and we see empty pill bottles, half empty, right? We see food that's almost rotting on a plate, or just half-eaten food. So they're just what I loved about this was that it's an absolute pigsty, and they give you all the different senses in this opening image, right? I'm smelling that bad food, right? I can almost kind of taste those nasty pills that I have to take. I'm smelling dirty laundry. I'm seeing obviously all of the grotesquerie that I'm seeing, and it's so cold. It's so cold that I almost feel a little bit cold when I'm watching this, and I'm also just feeling like my heart is beating a little bit because of the intense score here, and it's just something so not just grotesque about it, but we know that it's leading towards something, right? The camera's going to reveal something to us, not just what we've seen. And of course, what does it reveal, John? at the end of the shot.
Yeah, it reveals young Rose, and if I remember correctly, it goes from young Rose, it goes into a dissolve into her, right?
Um, from the young Rose to the next shot after that,
Yeah,
it actually hard cuts after a big crescendo of music, right to her answering the phone. Because if you remember, the phone rings
yeah,
to in. There's a crescendo with all of these like weird voices, doing these turning into these. It starts breathy, and then it turns
yeah,
into these monstrous, like, it almost sounds like people dying in a, like, being tortured in an echoey torture chamber at a distance, but louder and louder. And then it hard cuts to the sound cue of that telephone in her office right on the next image.
yeah. But it still goes directly to her afterwards. So we
Exactly.
go
So
from
what does
young
that mean?
Rose.
Yeah, why do they do that, and what kind of a what inference is that giving us?
Well, I think they're implying to us that this trauma hasn't left her, and it's more. I think that's more apparent on a rewatch or when you're sitting and thinking about it afterwards.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Constructionally speaking, just getting from scene to scene, it's just a jump cut to go from this period of time in the past to the present. But on a rewatch, I think they're telling us that this hasn't left her; it's still with her.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I thought was really cool about the opening image as well is, if you remember, when they're dollying, well, actually we actually forgot to, one of the first elements that's really awesome about this is it starts with Rose's face north south, right? Like she's looking straight at us, as you would if you were sitting upright in a chair right across from someone, right? And then the camera pulls out a little bit, and then it actually rotates 45 degrees, right? And so you see that she's dead and lying in a bed. And that becomes a sort of visual motif with the camera throughout the film, right? Um, and it's just this disorientation, and it gives us this sense right away from the first camera movement that, hey, what we're seeing, what we're perceiving, is not reality, right? There's something off to the side about this moment, about this image, that's going to be revealed to you, that ultimately makes you realize, hey, I perceived that all wrong, right? It's messing with me. Um, Something's topsy turvy. I don't know what it is, right? And I love that. But then the other thing is with color. I don't know if you noticed this, but um, everything is so dark and cold. It's like an ice box and a morgue, like I said, in that room, in the bedroom. And then once it kind of pans all the way around 180 so that we see young Rose, behind young Rose, there's this warm hallway light. So what we get is this really cool contrast between warm and cold. And I thought that that was very well crafted because um, there's this coldness that's contained within that room where the mother's lying, right? It's contained within that compartment of her mind. That is where the trauma lives, right? That memory specifically, that trigger. So, and then when we see the hallway beyond young Rose, who's sort of transfixed on her mother in that room, beyond her, behind her, the world, the outside world, so to speak, or the corridor toward the light, toward the outside, toward the, toward the end of the trauma cycle, maybe the escape hatch is behind her, toward the warmness, the yellow of that light. So I just thought that that was really, really cool. I wish we could put it on screen now, but we're not doing video yet. But it is just a really striking contrast. And when we see contrasts like that with lighting, I get really excited. And I'm sure you do as a cinematographer. Um,
Hmm.
what do you think of when people do stuff like that as a cinematographer, because you are a talented cinematographer? That first shot, could you comment to us a little bit about how the lighting and how the camera movement in general is giving us what we need there? how it's serving the story there, how it's contributing in a way that, say, the performances can't.
Yeah, I mean, film is a cohesive. It's a cohesive collaboration. If one department's lacking, then it's not going to be as effective as it could be, and it's why I often is why I often harp this, um, and why I often find like at the super independent level, at the level that we were working at, um, a couple of years ago, and why I was so rigid with you about the cinematography on your film that I shot. Um, I think that there are a lot of times where people just tend to focus on lighting the subject itself and not thinking about how lighting affects the tone and affects the mood. And I think also the sign of any good department that is, I guess you'd say below the line, sound is one that comes to mind most particularly, in that if you don't pick up on it right away because you're so engrossed in the film, then they did the best job that they could. When something is off, you immediately notice it. It breaks your immersion. And I must admit, I was so immersed in that first scene that I didn't pick up on a little of the on a number of like the smaller quirks in it. But the way that they made that shot move in that opening scene, because that opening image is one shot. It's just one continuous shot, which is exemplary. Hats off to them for making that decision. I think it really made it that much stronger.
Yeah, it's just so cool. Everything is so collaborative. It's true. And all of these elements come together in that first shot. And you're right. That next moment is a connection to her the self that comes after childhood, right? And that phone that wakes her up in the very next shot after that is interesting to me because they actually an interesting directorial choice is Parker chose to. There was a moment, if you remember, in that first act where the phone. I think it's actually a couple shots after that very first phone wake up scene moment in scene two, where he moves the camera toward the phone, and it might even be the same shot if I remember correctly. She answers the phone, she puts it down, she leaves the room, and then the camera leaves Rose and it pans back toward the desk, which is empty now because she left the room. And then it moves toward the phone. It stops at the phone and becomes an almost extreme close up of the phone. And then the phone rings, and then she answers it immediately. I thought that was really interesting. I thought maybe he's telling us that phone is just that is her life. She is confined to this office, which is almost like a cell for her because it prevents her from even just escaping all the trauma of her own life. You could just see it when she wakes up from that dream or vision or whatever it is. But yeah, I just found that a really interesting directorial choice to feature that. And when she picks up that phone really quickly and you don't expect her to, you're thinking, oh, this woman is tethered. Right? She's tethered to this room. She's tethered to this phone. It's very difficult for her to have an outside life. You can already tell. And she's liable to to break down at some point because of all the stress and the pressure. And he gives us that very early. And he gives us so much in that opening shot, that opening image. And then, of course, after that, the phone stuff, that first moment that we have in the therapy room, she's talking to Carl first, who's basically mumbling anxious craziness, right? Which what do you think of that character, Carl? That the bearded guy that she tries to kill later on, and that we see, he's the first patient that we see talking to her. And then, of course, after that is Laura, who's the person that commits suicide in front of her. But what did you think of Carl as a character, John? He's one of the first people we see. He's the exposition of the patient sort of demographic in the hospital. Why is it that we see him first? And why is it that we see him the way that we see him? Why did Parker choose, you think, to write him as so manic?
I think in a way he's this very manic character, like you said, and he has this representation of he's essentially the representation of the collective trauma that these characters are going to experience over the course of the film. And what I think what stuck with me at first, it came off as a little edgy for the sake of edgy nihilism. Um, but in a way, it kind of sets up the foreshadowing of the film because he keeps saying over and over again, it's like, we're all going to die, we're all going to die, we're all going to die. Or I think he starts off saying like, I'm going to die. And then it becomes, we're going to die. We're all going to die. And in a way we kind of discard this guy because he's a crazy person, but it does set up the foreshadowing of the film and how this collective trauma follows all these characters through this string. And I think that's one reason why they they set him up for that. Um, I must admit, I question if there was a different ending in mind at first because he sets up for something else that I thought they would eventually go towards, and then they didn't. We'll talk about that more at the ending. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
but I think
That's
he's a
really
great
interesting.
foreshadowing tool and a great. Or sorry to cut you off. He has this. He also serves as a nice introduction for like what kind of place Rose is working in and the kind of people she might deal with on a daily basis because he is so manic and he's definitely not well. So I think in a way it sets him up as both a foreshadowing tool and also, like you said, an exposition tool that she works in a mental institution with people who are more than just not okay.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, it's really funny that I had the same exact reaction when I first saw Carl. I'm going to die. You're going to die. Mom's going to die. Everyone's going to die. Everything, nothing matters. We're all going to die. That that's a bold choice, I think, for a character. Just because I think, like you said, and I got the same reaction, it comes off as just pure silly nihilism, right? Only because we're so aware of the genre, right? We're so aware of the thematic elements of the movie already that to have a character like that almost seems like an unnecessary uh an annoyance of a distillation of everything, right? But I wonder if again, I'd love to have Parker on here and interview him if he does end up listening to this. I'd love to speak to you, but I wonder if when he was writing that, he had that concern, right? Like I wonder how that character was formulated in his mind, and I wonder what draft he kind of perfected him in. But just to continue with that, I agree with you. He It's jarring at first and it almost distasteful for the film, right? Because it's just so overt and in your face. But it really does become actually something of a triviality compared to what happens next in the movie, right? And so on and so forth. Right? That guy is the least of our worries, right? His problems, so to speak. I don't mean to compare problems among patients, but at least this guy doesn't seem to be haunted by this thing that's going to kill him. But like you said, he's used as a tool to foreshadow the thing that does. And I just find it tickles me. I find it very fun and fascinating how he uses this character that's sort of an eye-rolling plant, sort of a feel in this story. And then that character becomes a sort of almost like he's a hero in the film in a sense, right? He's actually he's actually a ray of hope I think in some of these scenes, right? It's like he's trying to communicate to her something that she needs to know. And that actually becomes, to me, a very important aspect of this movie, right? Because later on, um, right after this scene that we're talking about, where we meet Carl, she sends him away. She's talking with Laura, who's this girl who's on the poster of the movie, right? Laura, this character smiling, is the poster of the movie. She's the face of the movie, and the whole idea, right, is that she's trying to communicate about, she's trying to put into words and articulate what is happening to her, right? And whether it's real or not, we get the sense that Rose is not listening correctly. Right? She's not really, she may be hearing what she's saying, but she's not listening. And Laura tells her that. And that mirrors later on in the movie, right? When Trevor, her husband, is not quite listening to her, Rose, right? So we're talking about cycles of trauma here, and also cycles of provocation, and maybe cycles of failures to address what these traumas really are head on. So Carl is a really good, I think, sort of patient zero, for lack of a better term, to give us the idea of what kind of becomes of someone who's not listened to, and someone who's not fully understood in even a professional setting where your job description is to professionally understand and get down in the deep there in the muck with the patient. And in a way, there's a sense that I get from this movie that, hey, all of this nonsense could be stopped somehow if we just listened to each other a little bit better. And of course, that sounds very kumbaya, right? But that is a subtext here that I think is extremely important, right? Because it's not, when we think of it that way, I think it's not just the fault of a person to be born with trauma, or in that circumstance, or to have been unlucky enough to see the smile and to get it. But it's the fault of the people around us as well, right? That are making it proliferate, and that are making it worse or not improving for us. They're not there for us. I think that's a lot of what this movie is about too, right? These characters seem very disconnected from each other. I see it in her with her sister, right? I see it with, obviously, her with her mother. I see her with her husband, her with her ex-boyfriend, Jake. That becomes an increasingly, important part of the film. But we talked about that opening, and the opening really ends with, I wanted to get your take on this scene right before the credits, which is technically when the opening sequence ends, which is this scene with Laura, this patient that Rose gets called to go see, and she tries to explain to her what's happening, and then, of course, she commits suicide in front of her, and she tells her she's not listening, and then she becomes the smile, and then she passes it on to Rose. Why is this, do you think, John, why is this the last thing that we see before the title? And how does this connect with the film in a way that says, hey, this is our opening, this is the end of our opening sequence, this is what you're in for? Why is this effective, this scene?
Well, I think it's effective in the same way that the Bond movies always opened up with a cold open.
The
It
Bond
it
movies, you
has,
said? James
yeah, like
Bond?
the James Bond movies.
Yeah.
The James Bond movies would always open up with these seemingly unrelated, and this one's clearly related to the film. It's not a cold open, it's more of an opening. But I always point to the Bond movies as a means of hooking your audience in.
Yeah.
If you want to grab their attention, and I say this with screenwriting too. I probably stole this from Blake Snyder's book as well, way back when I first read it. But when any good story will always have you ask multiple questions right from the jump. Who's this person? Why is this happening? Why is this happening to them? Where is this happening?
Right.
And over time, over the course of the film, this information is going to be disseminated to us. We're going to learn about who this is. We're going to learn why this is happening. We're going to learn where this is. This is like pretty basic stuff, but having something like that happen hooks you in because you're
Right.
asking all these questions. It means you're active. You're actively participating when you ask these questions. And while the opening of a Bond film is pretty self-contained, it follows all these same philosophies, you know? And I think that's why they opened up with this and then they had the credit sequence start from there because it's a pretty clean place to stop for that break because now you've just digested what's happened to our main character going in from the going following the inciting incident with Rose's patient killing herself right in front of her. And then we have this shot where it just keeps going until it goes through her eyeball into a black screen. Title card, roll credits. It's brilliant.
Right.
Um, from a stylistic stance in particular, but the opening credits also serve as a nice reset. It lets you process everything that just happened, and then you go from there. It's a nice little breather. You're not going to just be completely assaulted on every front
Hmm.
and having to go immediately to the next scene. It lets you digest it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are so many elements of that scene that are memorable and set the tone, right? I agree that final moment of the camera dollying all the way or just moving all the way toward her eye um is it's great. It's brilliant, right? That is the movie in a sense, right? I mean, you can sort of see the spirit. It's almost a reverse movement, right, of this spirit thing going out of Laura's body and into us, right? It's showing us, hey, this is what we're going to be seeing. We're going to see what Laura was seeing, right? We're going into her consciousness in a sense, right, through Rose. So I thought that was great, and I love when opening moments have, right, these camera movements and these elements that really contribute to something that's more than just, hey, let's move the camera, this will be cool, right? And that's a great moment. I also love the bloody smile and the body bag that they show,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because what she does is she cuts a smile into her face, right, into her cheek, and then she goes lower with the pottery shard, and then it cuts the rest of her throat, and we see this amazing throat slashing sequence. um, and that was really clever too, right? So a lot of clever, interesting, exciting exposition happening here with images, and that's what I love, right?
Yeah.
And that's what this podcast, speaking cinema. The reason that I wanted to call this speaking cinema is because we are speaking a language here, right? And the language is shown through audio and visual elements, right? We're speaking Spanish, we're speaking English. No, we're speaking cinema. This is the language that we're talking about, right? So what these images are actually telling us. Um, Everything that you see in this opening image it alludes to something. Every line of dialogue alludes to something that is to come later on, right? It's a very foreboding and intense sequence. And I think that the performances are great in this opening sequence, right? It really launches the tone and the feel of the movie in the way that it needs to. So, what I wanted to do is a bit of I call this scenic view. I wanted to pick a couple moments now that we've opened the film, John. What's a scene that you felt like, because we don't have, 3 days to talk about the whole movie. I wish we did. But what are some scenes that you thought were really fascinating and effective and they used interesting tools? What were some scenes that stood out to you that we could talk about?
The birthday scene.
Yeah.
Birthday scene. That's
Yeah.
that's the scene. That is. There's a lot of good stuff in this film, but that birthday scene is like it's the highlight of the film that got me from in just generally enjoying what I was watching and
Hmm.
saying, "Oh, okay, you got me. I'm gonna let you take me. I'm gonna let you take me to the finish line here."
Right.
Because there's that particular moment that we'll talk about in a second, but I did, and I think you know me well enough with my taste in films at this point that, and also you having shown me some pretty weird films that have both influenced my taste further as both a filmmaker and film appreciator, but also just raising my standards on what can and should be done and expected of a filmmaker in order to make something great. And there is a moment in that birthday scene where I realize what is happening, and I go from just enjoying another scene to I am I'm laying in bed watching this movie,
Hmm.
and I sit up, I rocket out of like my position from a more passive stance to actively leaning forward. My hands are over my mouth, realizing what is going to happen here. And yeah, let's jump into that.
What's cool to me about what you're saying is, and it gives me so much hope for, not that I need so much hope for the horror genre in general, because it just seems to survive everything and it's so applicable to any time. But that scene, I agree. First of all, I think that scene is absolutely, it's alarming, and it's traumatic to us as the viewers in and of itself. But the thing about it is, there's nothing in that scene, in my opinion, that I haven't seen a million times in other horror movies, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing in that scene that you can say belongs to Smile alone, exclusively. So, I guess my next question to you, I can give you my thoughts on it, but I want to know your thoughts because you really leaned forward and were engaged in this moment. I think even more than I was. But what was it about the editing, or was it the score? Was it the rhythm? Could you Is there something you could hone in on what made you these elements again that we've seen sort of generically in other movies? What is it that the way that they were assembled made you react that way?
So the reason I reacted that way is because they properly set it up. They properly foreshadowed what was going to happen. And when you properly foreshadow something, because I think we can both agree, Chekhov's gun, to an extent, has sometimes made foreshadowing this thing that is, it can be too easy, right? You see
Right.
somebody, you see a gun on the wall. Well, they're going to use that gun, except in that one instance in Killers of the Flower Moon, where I'm like, I can't believe they didn't use this gun once in a almost 4 hour movie.
Yeah.
Um, I really liked Killers of the Flower Moon, but that was the one thing where I'm like, why did you cut to a shot of a gun if Robert De Niro's not going to use it? I thought that was silly. Maybe it's a red herring. Maybe it's misdirection. It is Scorsese, and the man is brilliant, and one of my favorite directors. But I thought that was funny. Anyway, but it's an instance like that. You point to a shot of a gun, and a lot of people will go, "All right, we're going to see that. We're going to see
Right.
that happen." And sometimes foreshadowing can be obvious, but in this case, Mustache the cat disappears, right? He disappears like the previous scene or two scenes prior. There's a discussion about it, and it's just like, oh, like Mustache is missing, and like Mustache missing is clearly a problem. And I think she notices Mustache missing when she is wrapping the present for her nephew. And it cohesively ties together. It's like, oh, the cat's missing. That's clearly a problem. All right, well, now we're going to wrap the train set that I got for my nephew. We think it's the train set that's in that box when she is wrapping the present. Why would we think otherwise? The cat went missing. Okay, but like clearly the cat's not going to be in the box, like Gwyneth Paltrow's head. Um, And then we get to that next scene, and the next scene being the birthday scene, we get to the birthday scene, and Rose enters with the gift, and then they place the gift, but the gift gets taken, and then her guest, who's introduced to her by other people in the cast, they go off together to the kitchen, and then they start doing the birthday scene. Kid opens up a gift set that's clearly not a model train set, and he's very excited about it. And so we think, oh, maybe he's actually going to be disappointed by the model train set that Rose gives her, because we're in birthday mode. But like, this feels like a normal scene. It feels like a normal moment for this character. And the worst thing that we think is going to happen is he's going to get disappointed because his mom clearly might not know him as well as she thinks she does, or even possibly gives Rose a bad note that says, "Oh, he's into model trains," but he's really not into model trains. He's into other stuff because he's a kid with a million interests. Um, and then the kid goes to open up the present, and it's just the way that they frame the shot. It's just this moment that's giving a little too much emphasis on opening up a package that is as mundane as a model train set.
Right.
And it's that moment, it's that shot that's placing unnecessary emphasis on the mundane that makes you say, "Oh no. Oh,
Yeah.
it's the cat. Why is it the cat?" Also, justice for mustache. Um, Brilliant scene. I hate the fact that the cat dies, but that's a personal thing. I don't like it when when animals die
Right.
in movies. Um,
Right.
Even when it's justified for the plot. It's like my one thing where I'm like, I really wish you didn't, but I get why this had to happen.
Right.
It's like the ending to, I Am Legend. It's the same thing. It's like, I hate this so much, but it's necessary. Um,
Yeah. Actually, it's
because I
funny
think
you
like
mentioned that.
the death
Just
of an
real quick.
animal. Sorry.
Well, real quick. The you say, "Oh no," when she opens the box. I actually rewatched the film last night with my father, and he had never seen it before. And when that scene came, he just gave a good "uh-oh." It's like he barely said anything during the movie. But during that scene, as he was opening the gift, before we even saw that it could have been anything that went wrong, my father just went, "Oh no." And it was great because again, someone, and he's not typically a horror watcher. But this scene is doing such a great job of communicating the tension in this moment that it grabbed my my father by the cojones,
Yeah.
and it just did a number on both of us. I mean, I had seen that. I think it was my third time seeing it, and I felt my heart sink. And yeah, it is put together so well that I forgot what it even felt like to watch that scene. But anyway, yeah, you were saying about animals.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of times too where horror movies in particular, but also there's a number of movies in general where they will take they'll take the death of an animal, and it's a very easy way to elicit a reaction from the audience. And for me, just generally, like, having grown up with animals my whole life,
Hmm.
um, I think when you kill an animal in a film, especially a domesticated animal like a cat or a dog in particular, um, you really got to sell it, and you really got to write it so that it works. Otherwise, I think it's cheap, and I don't respect you as much as a filmmaker. It's like my one thing that I
Hmm.
get very particular about, because I think it's easy because it's so upsetting. Whereas a scene like this, it's like, I hate the fact that they killed the cat because I love cats.
Hmm.
However, it works because it's a almost like a point of no return for
Yeah.
Rose, because she's clearly gone from being stressed out and traumatized to, there's something seriously messed up going on here. And I think I don't think it's quite the hour point. I know it's definitely past what we'd call like the belly of the whale in in what Campbell and Snyder would phrase as in the hero's journey. Because the belly of the whale, I think, is usually like that's the point of no return, which is generally going out of Act One into Act Two, and this is a bit further in, around I think roughly around the midway point.
Yeah.
But that is a point of no return for Rose, because she does go from being somebody who was traumatized by a bad work experience to committing acts that she can't recall. And now she's delving into full blown psychosis.
Right.
And that's why it's effective. In the same way, the ending, when Will Smith has to kill his dog in I Am Legend, it's very effective because it's set up, it's established, and it has an impact on the narrative in a significant way that's not cheap. And that's why it works so well for me as a scene. Because on top of that, she's also traumatizing everybody else.
Right.
And I think there's something interesting there I'd like to talk about when we get back to the end, but I'm going to put
Yeah.
a placeholder on that for now, because I will say I thought that they might have been doing something different with that scene too. But
Hmm.
regardless, setting up her character, it still works as a scene.
Right.
It's still a fantastic scene. It's one of the highlight scenes of the film for me. Um,
Yeah.
but I did think that they were going to do something with that, and they didn't, and I was a little curious as to why. But again, we'll talk about that in the final image.
Yeah. Yeah. And you just reminded me of something that was really cool. A little tiny nugget that I didn't think about as much before, but you just said, oh, she's also traumatizing everyone else in the room, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the sister, if you remember, there's a moment where she's talking on the porch with her sister, trying to apologize and to explain to her what is actually happening to her, Rose. And then the sister says, well, at some point she says, well, you completely traumatized whatever his name is. I forget her son's name. But do you remember she completely traumatized her son, right, as well? And there's that moment, that sequence ends where Rose goes back to the car, right? And then we see in the background the sister comes back, and we have that crazy, snapped neck smiling gag with the sister,
Mm-hmm.
and she's freaking out in the car. And do you remember how it pulls away from her freaking out in the car, and it passes the window threshold, and we see this her son with that traumatized look on his face, looking at her being
Yeah.
traumatized in her car, and he's just he doesn't even know what to make of it. I mean, it that mirrors the reaction of the young actress from the first opening image of Rose when she was looking at her mother, right? I thought that
Yeah.
was a great connective tissue between all of this stuff, right? It's like you don't even need the smile monster
Yeah.
to pass through a person to traumatize them through it. Like it speaks to, I think it just speaks to the power of, of negative influence on other people with your behavior, and that's a lot of what's in this movie.
Yeah.
So that's a great choice for the scene. I mean, there are so many scenes with really cool moments. Another one that I'd like to talk about, just a scene that I thought was kind of neat, was the scene in the jail cell, or the
Yeah.
scene where she's
That's a
visiting
really good
the
scene.
yeah, she's visiting the dude. Um, and I think that they were saying a lot of different things with this. He was the one guy apparently that was able to break the chain by killing someone else, right? And like you said, traumatizing other people, how the behavior and how you're handling the trauma, realizing how that spreads and how that affects other people. Um, but I think that this is a good time, as good of as any, to drop uh this. I think that this was a very effective COVID movie. I think that this movie was, I mean, obviously they're treating this like a virus, right? We're in September of 2022. At this point, it's been, a little under a couple years since that thing started. And this movie treats this explicitly like a pathological, like a virus, a pandemic of trauma. And I just thought that they did a beautiful job with that. I don't know if anyone else was thinking about that, but I wanted to talk about this being a COVID movie, and this was definitely one of those scenes that sort of that made that idea more prominent to me, right? This guy finds out that she is the one that's carrying, she's the host of this thing, right? It's in her. And then, he does whatever he needs to. He sacrifices another person to avoid it, right? He passes it to someone else, and they perish because of it. Or I'm sorry, he kills someone else, right? It's the only way to get out of it. So there was so much death and destruction and mayhem that pandemic caused, and it was because of this easily spreadable virus, this invisible enemy, as the president called it at the time, right? And this
Mhm.
thing is invisible to everyone. So, and another moment that I really thought that was underscored by this scene was when he finally does find out that it's her, and he starts to freak out and says, "Get her away from me! It's, I got to get out of here," or whatever he says. Right? That to me, it brought back my own personal sort of sense of trauma from the COVID period, because when you just think about the feeling that you got, right? When you found out, when that virus was still fresh and new and unfamiliar to us, and we were listening to every little word that the medical community was telling us. Just to remember as well as you can right now in this moment how you felt, the danger, the panic of when someone you knew or you had just spoken to was exposed, right? Exposed to the virus, or was a host to the virus, and you had just talked to them, or you were talking to them in the moment and you just found out. Um, that moment of panic is what I saw in this scene, in this performance. And it just made me realize how much of a pandemic movie this is. And on top of that, I don't know if this was how much Parker was thinking about this, but I just love the connection between this and The Mask, right? Because the mimesis of this movie, the part that is replicating and mimetic, how we see the transfer or the manifestation of the virus, is through the smile, which is the bottom half of the face, right? The bottom half of the face is exactly what we were repressed from with mask wearing during the virus, right? During the lockdown and during the quarantine. And that got me thinking about how we were repressed as a species from each other, from seeing each other emote, right? It really repressed children from being able to experience society and all the social aspects of their growth, right? Because of this mask wearing, we heard so much of that. If only we were able to see people smile, right? And then when the masks finally dropped, I remember thinking how great it is to see someone just smile and emote, right? Because you can only smile with your eyes so much. So I think that this film was incredibly clever conceptually in giving us a fear through something that's very much an outlet for us that we were repressed from during this long, difficult period. What do you think about that? Did that enter your mind at all, or was it? Does that make any sense?
It's a really interesting interpretation. I must admit I didn't think about that at all when I was watching it because I was so
Hmm.
focused on the psychological elements of the film because that seemed to be the primary focus of it.
Right.
I would love to talk to Parker Finn about that because um, this is actually an adaptation of a short film that he made.
Right.
And that short film was released in March 2020 at I think South by Southwest was the premiere.
Hmm.
So this was a this was based on a short film that he had to have filmed somewhere between 2018 and 2019 before the pandemic, and then it was released just as everything was shutting down. So I would be
Hmm.
very curious to hear about how this may have influenced and changed from the short film, because I can't imagine that this guy was filming this movie in December of 2019 after hearing about this mysterious virus going around in China in November, because um, I know that I remember I didn't hear about COVID until like January of 2020, and I was one of like the early
Hmm.
people who started hearing about it, and thinking like, I wonder if I should start stocking up on things. But I think it could be fair to say that he incorporated this element. I just I don't I personally didn't see that, but I also
Hmm.
think that if you can make a compelling case for an analysis,
Yeah.
then
And
whether the
to
filmmaker
be
intended
fair,
for it or not, the
sorry,
case
but to
can
be
be made.
fair, I didn't actually think about this until like the second watch or so. So,
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's why I'm always generally coming up with a new interpretation every time I watch your favorite movie.
absolutely.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
just have
Like
to say, yeah,
every time I watch Burning, I'm always finding something new.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Listen,
Or
there's a
your other
reason
favorite
that
movie,
we
Cure.
listen, there
Yeah,
are reasons why
every time
we
I watch Cure, I'm coming up with a new reason for like why
yeah,
why you love
well,
those movies so much.
I mean, listen, movies are very personal, not just because they're personally made, right? But because there's so much detail that we're seeing in these movies without even realizing it, that it becomes so personal in the aesthetics, in
Yeah.
the style, right? In the way that they're telling the story. Does the story connect to you on a personal level at all? And even if it doesn't, it becomes personal in other ways other than just the sort of naked story, right?
Mm.
It's you feel like almost like the movie was made for you in a sense, almost like you're being sung to one
Yeah.
on one, right? You're being serenaded. There's a collective performance happening for you, right? Because you get so immersed in the sounds and the images, and it takes you somewhere. And I always kind of imagine that it's sort of like I kind of imagine the director and the rest of the crew just sort of like whispering things into my ear as I'm watching the movie, and so it feels very personal in that sense. So I really and that's why some people love movies and other people hate the same movie, and that's why this is also fascinating to think about and to talk about. Um, and some of the other
Well, it's
technical
also
things. Oh yeah, no, go ahead.
no. Well, and I was just gonna say on top of that too, going off of another film, one that we actually both love, not me just joking. Um, is the film House, the Japanese film from 1977. I've seen that movie so many
Yeah.
times. I've shown so many people that movie, and I never understood how the atomic bomb played into that film.
Hmm.
And by the director's own admittance, that is a key factor to the film. That does play an element to it. And I think it was like screening 9 or 10, I think last year when I watched it, where I finally started to get one scene in particular. And as I was watching it, I started to realize, oh, this is a really wacky movie. We can enjoy it for all the wacky, insane things that happen. And I'm starting to get it. I'm starting to get that there is a profound sadness to this film,
Hmm.
and sometimes it does take a number of screenings to say, oh, I get it. I get what the filmmaker was going for here, with this particular
Right.
thing, or even finding your own analysis to it. Um,
Right.
and like I said earlier, if you can make a compelling case for something, whether the filmmaker planned for it or not, it warrants a discussion. It warrants exploring it.
it's really fascinating to me in retrospect that I didn't think about it being a pandemic movie. But like you said, when a movie has enough in it, and there already are so many details, and you do watch it on that second viewing, there's there's something about having the experience again, right? Knowing what's going to happen, where you can read everything in a different way, right? And that's what we like to do on this podcast is to read the movies in a way where we can sort of try to understand what these people are trying to tell us, right? Um, it almost feels like Parker Finn is telling us that we're in an age of trauma, right? It's everything. That's what I was saying in the beginning, that this whole movie just is soaking wet with trauma and darkness and Kal Penn seems to be this just very like dreary sort of banal sort of boss. Even that seems like it's adding to her problems, right? Every time she talks to her sister or tries to go to dinner with her, it adds layers to the issues. Trevor, her husband, every interaction seems to be just forced somehow, right? There's a weight that's attached to everything, even in the modanities of this woman's life, right? And it's not just because she works in trauma, right? It's more than that. It transcends that. It almost feels like there's something, and even the mustache, as you called him, not the cat, but the ex-boyfriend mustache. Two great mustaches in this movie that very tragically died.
Yeah.
Even with him, there's like I don't know, there's a longing and a sorrow about the past, and he seems very alone, and he seems like one of these sort of very postmodern men that maybe can't quite connect with other men very easily, or hold a relationship. He's a nice guy, but there's something, you know what I mean? So every pore of this movie to me just seems to have a kind of not just on its face horror-y element that we see in a very cookie cutter kind of way, right? That we can connect to other movies, but there's a like a stitch work done here, kind of a commentary about how just postmodern life in America, especially during pandemic times, right, has this weightiness to it, right? There's a lot of effort that needs to be brought out to make even the these menial interactions to make them successful, or to get something positive and to get something out of it that's going to really help you on your way to the end of the day, right? And so you mentioned nihilism before with Carl, and I'm going to die, you're going to die, everyone's going to die. Even now, just talking about the movie with you, I realize just how much that character is. He's speaking nihilism, right? But it's not just pure nihilism in the sense that, okay, everything has absolutely no purpose at all, and we should just die. There's something that's sort of binding everything together in the world of this
There's
movie.
an inevitability to
Yes, it's not just the monster, right? It's something else. It's a sickness in perhaps in the society. There's a drabness, there's a dreariness, there's a banality. And they bring that out in the bland. I was actually taking some notes about the blandness of the walls, of a lot of the walls in this movie. They're not decorated with a lot of art, especially in the hospital. They're sort of pastel-y colors that try to be like nice and pleasant, but there's something drab about them, right? And just in the way that they colored the movie and the skies, and the way that the camera turns upside down, which is another thing that I wanted to mention, which I thought was a kind of a clever turn that frown upside down kind of a gag, but it also but it also gives you this feeling of topsy-turviness. Which end is up? Where am I supposed to go in this world? Where's north? Where's south? What's my direction in life? How do I ground myself? Right? So I just thought that that was very, very interesting too. And so, like you said, this is why we talk about these movies. There's so much work done in here, stitched in to the fabric that makes the world what it is. Yeah, I just, it's very fascinating that way. Even in the moments that I think are a little bit like canned to me and the dialogue could be a little bit better, it's still all these in between moments. It all adds up to something that's very, it sucks you into the world very effectively. And it's something to behold, especially as a directorial debut, right? A feature
Yeah.
directorial debut for Parker Finn. I mean, my hat's off.
It's
Congratulations, right? I mean, it's a
a very
really,
strong debut.
absolutely, it really is. So let's go into the closing of this movie, John.
Hmm.
And I know that you weren't a big fan of this. Probably less so of me. I wasn't a huge fan of the closing too, but you felt more strongly about it. Why don't you take the
We'll get
closing here?
yeah, let's hop into that.
Do you want me to
As
just
as a
break?
quick
Let's break down really quick just what happens first. So yeah, the ending of this movie is we have this sort of I almost call it like an Inception moment or a Truman Show moment where the character thinks that she's escaping this burning house that sort of represents her childhood and her own personal traumas, right? The monster makes her sort of think that it's burning and she wins and she gets back to Jake. And then it tricks her. The walls sort of come crashing down, or they don't come crashing down. She exits the apartment, right? And she's right back at the house. And then she goes back into the house, right?
Yeah, and
And we have this moment where the monster
um
engulfs her, and then she lights
I had
herself on
personal
fire.
qualms with that. Um,
Yeah. So
you
what
and I
bothered
have
you about? Yeah.
famously,
What bothered you
amongst
about
our
that?
friends, had conversations about where horror goes and why I'm like very
Yeah.
particular about horror because
Yeah.
I'm just not a fan of everybody dying at the end. Um, it's like, it's like, yeah, I get it. Death comes for us all. It's inevitable. You can't stop it, even if you become immortal. Like, you can't escape the heat death of the universe. It's like, I get it, you nerd. Um, let me enjoy my movie for 2 hours. Let me learn a lesson here. Don't kill your main character. The only time I would disagree with that statement there though is if the death of a main character is in an altruistic fashion,
Hmm.
because then they're doing it for a greater purpose. It's for a greater good. And in this film, it felt like it took an easy way out. Now, the inevitability of what that main character of what not the main character what Carl sets up, like we're all going to die, you're going to die, I'm going to die, that whole manic thing. It's like, all right, well, you at least foreshadowed it, and it wasn't the cheapest thing. I can't be mad. You told me at the beginning of the movie they're all going to die. But when your film is about collective trauma, I feel like you're trying to say one thing and your ending says another. Because when you kill your main character who's trying to escape her trauma, you're basically saying, you can't escape your trauma. It's gonna get you, and that's a bummer. Um, but again, I think the way that they set it up and the fact that they foreshadowed it, it's fine. It
Hmm.
it works. It ends on a cliffhanger, so we can get Smile too. Um, and it's not the worst ending I've ever seen. But I think there's like three different endings that would have worked better. Ending one, this is if I was just in the driver's seat. And again, Parker, if you're listening, this is all constructive. This is, um, I didn't hate the ending, but I think there were like three different directions I was expecting it to go. And when I got this ending, I was a bit frustrated because you have Carl, the crazy guy, and they say if you inflict trauma on people, like if you kill somebody and somebody witnesses it, you are safe and you've passed it on to somebody else. So I thought at one point, okay, she's going to kill Calpen. Carl's the witness. And because Carl's already horrifically traumatized, he's the perfect host for it. But if she manages to frame Carl because there's no cameras, Well, then Carl gets locked up. He's put in a straitjacket for the rest of his life, and the ghost is trapped. There's no way that that Carl's going to be able to hurt anybody, and this ends with Carl. Right? That was one direction I thought it was going to go. Direction two, I thought they were going to pull something a la The Ring. You know, she traumatizes her nephew, and it gets passed on to him because, you know, she killed the cat, and that's super dramatic, especially to a child. So I thought that they might have gone with like that kind of dark ending there, where
Mm-hmm.
the kid gets traumatized halfway through the movie. It's like when they copy the videotape in The Ring. And it's this thing that they just do. And then they try to stop the curse, but the curse has been stopped a while ago.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was another direction that they were going to go. And then the third direction I thought they were going to go was, okay, well, she's clearly going through this mental maze here to fight the monster. In order to overcome your trauma, you have to become mentally strong. And
Mm-hmm.
that mental maze she goes through at the end, I thought was going to be like a set of trials to overcome her trauma and realize that this isn't real. This is all in her head, and she has to overcome this. But they didn't do any of those things. Instead, the monster crawls into her and she lights herself on fire in front of her ex-boyfriend, and we don't know if this gets passed on to him or if it dies with both of them because he's in the house when it catches on fire. Which I guess in a way could have been the altruistic ending. But in the same sense, if she set herself on fire before Jake entered, Jake's not going to witness her traumatic death. He's only going to witness the house burning down. And I don't think that would have been enough for the ghost. So then she commits an altruistic act, sacrificing herself to stop the spread of the virus, or the spread of the curse. And again, as a roller coaster, the current ending works. But I think for what they were going for, there were a couple different endings that I think would have been more poignant. And I don't know why they settled on this ending. But the final image is a great final image that's kind of a callback to the end of the opening when they go through her ex-boyfriend's eyeball instead of her eyeball, and implying the cycle continues.
Right.
So it's like they still knew what they were doing with that ending, even though I think that there were like 3 stronger endings they could have gone with that would have imparted a message.
Yeah, I could see that. I did think that the mother monster was cool.
Oh, it's
And that
cool. Like I
mother,
said, it's a roller coaster at the end. It's
yeah,
really cool
and
and it's really fun, but it
yes,
just, yeah,
the meaning of the ending and the choices that they made, absolutely. And I think that the key word that I agree with you is definitely safe. Um, it connects all the dots, right? It makes the cycle continue. It's a
yeah,
fun little, tinge of future terror of the world of the movie that you get at the end there. But yeah,
yeah,
I couldn't help but think also that there must have been something that could have been a little bit stronger somehow. But also
yeah.
we could
You
just talk about
hear
the images
Matthew
that we
Lillard in the
see.
background. You know, you also hear Matthew Lillard in the background being like, "She's not a virgin. She has to die. It's the rules."
That always works. That's a wild card. It's a free space for
Yeah,
any movie.
even though
Matthew Lillard,
we're clearly inferring that she's not a virgin because she has multiple boyfriends, and that's not fair at all. But like,
right?
but it's,
Yeah,
yeah, it's like you hear Matthew Lillard being like, "She has to die. It's the rules." For whatever reason, and it's like, all right.
yeah, and a Greek chorus, but you know, it, it it's a very cool, interesting final showdown, right? I do like the fact that we watch her engulf this thing. It's crawling into her mouth. It's kind of strange to me the way that it cuts away from that shot kind of quickly. Um, I do like how we don't see too much of that monster, but it just sort of opens up her mouth and starts to go inside, and it just cuts away from a wide. And it was just that was very different to me. I don't think it was necessarily bad. It was just a little bit jarring somehow. But the meaning of it, right? She's I do love that the monster takes the form of the mother, right? And it's sort of like the original version of itself combined with her mother at the end when it gets very tall. It looks like, Marilyn Manson kind of a thing with, on stilts. Um, and just that look that you get from the face is kind of interesting and fascinating. And it's scary. I'm always a fan of what you don't see a little bit more. So it was a little bit of a disappointment to me to see the face of this thing because it is faceless for so much of the movie and it assimilates uh, to the person. It's kind of like the thing that way, the thing from another world, or the thing.
And that's why I thought they
So
were going with the mentally tough, like mentally tough becoming ending, because it's the
right,
first time we see the monster and the monster's personalized to her experience, but it's all in her head
right,
too.
right. But if you
That's where I thought
remember,
they were going.
true. But because also the monster takes off it rips its own face off,
Yeah.
which is, I guess, whatever the mother ingredient, Rose's mother's ingredient in there is being taken off, and we just see this sort of like, I don't know, central nervous system underneath of like eyeballs and muscles and and brain and stuff, whatever that is. Half of Harvey Dent. Uh, but yeah, so that's interesting. But engulfed, and then we finally see, oh, this is how the spirit physically possesses, and then she goes and does the thing where she burns herself, and it is a cool moment where they have that gaze at the end. And the motif of this movie that I really enjoyed and thought was pretty effective was that gaze. It's not just the smile. There's a traumatic gaze in this movie it seems to have that's something all of its own, right? It starts with this corpse gazing at us, and then Rose does. We see it in Carl. We see it in Laura. We see it in all the victims. We obviously see it in adult Rose. We see it as well in the prisoner that she goes to visit. We see it in Jake at the end. We see it in the boy, her nephew. It's just there's something very penetrative about that gaze, and I think I remember reading essays by Robin Wood on horror about the gaze in horror and how it penetrates and it destroys. And it has kind of a life of its own. It's a force of its own. Just the stare, the eyes focusing in on something very intensely. And it's used very cleverly in this horror movie, and it's used very effectively in many other horror movies. So I really enjoyed how they used that gaze and all the rest, the art decoration, the cinematography. Shout out to Charlie Saroff, who I think shot the film incredibly well. Cristobal Tapia de Ver, I hope I'm saying that correctly, the musician that wrote the score, right? Very effective. Lots of cool electronic effectsy stuff, like the flies buzzing and all that kind of stuff, and the hits and the crescendos and the bells that we heard, like a death toll bell I heard in there. All really interesting stuff that really served the story. And I thought that the edit was really good. Elliot Greenberg was the editor. Very tight, right? Wouldn't you say, John? You're a good editor.
Yeah, I was pretty impressed with the editing on this.
Yeah. And I think the editing, the rhythm of those sequences that make them really effective, that is, that is paramount in making these moments work, right? It's rhythm, it's timing. It's kind of like comedy that way, right? Like these scares, these suspenseful
Mhm.
moments. It's cutting away or cutting to at the right place. It's bleeding into other shots. It's dissolving. It's L cutting and J cutting, and there's so much that's involved in constructing the scare, or constructing and maintaining the atmosphere, right? That makes the scare actually have meaning and force in the film. So that was pretty cool. So I just wanted to ask you real quick, John, what you think about the final song being "Lollipop" by the Chordettes. This was an interesting choice, I thought. Right as the credits roll, "Lollipop" plays, and you know it's just this innocent little happy song from the 50s or whatever, 60s or whatever. And then it just kind of goes to silence.
I think I was so frustrated with the ending and the direction that it went that it just it didn't really register to me because it was kind of I was stewing in my frustration for a second, being like, you had like a layup on like three different endings that I think would have been stronger, and this is what you went
Right.
with, and then you're closing with Lollipop.
Right.
I didn't get the choice, but it is creepy, and if I think about it a little more, I might see why they chose that. What I will say is that Parker Finn, both as a writer and as a director, the first two acts of the film are, to me, it was very sharp, and it told me this is a guy who knows what he's doing.
Hmm.
So the choice to close the film with Lollipop feels like an informed choice. It feels like it's there for a reason and not because they said, "Oh, it's snappy. It'll stick with you because of the juxtaposition." I don't think that. I think he had a particular reason to close with that, and I just haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah. I think I yeah I what I well what I felt when I was watching it was a sort of confusion, but I think a good confusion. I felt like this torn sense of almost how should I feel with this, because it was such a strong juxtaposition from the rest of the movie,
Hmm.
right? Obviously, it's a happy-go-lucky little song that you smile to while you sing,
Yeah,
right? And I do think that it underscored a lot of the um, that juxtaposition in the movie, right? We're
yeah,
born we're born as babies to understand, and we have evolved to understand the binary relationship between smiling and frowning, right? When you're an infant, when you're a baby, the smile is good and the frown is bad, right? And that's that. And you learn from that and you build your foundations of understanding of emotion and the world from there, right? But this film comes in and it says, hey, remember those moments where you were maybe growing up, or whatever childhood traumas you've had, when things just became so confusing and twisted, that your entire bearings on the world are just totally unmoored, and and shifting, right? And you start to become unbalanced, and don't feel like you're connected to the world in the way that you always did. And there's a sense of just losing your balance, and losing your senses and your wits about you, right? So once you start to come of age and you realize that the smile can be so many different things, um it's just fascinating that this film kind of hits on that. And because of that, I created a little list of cultural smiles. Um, just kind of just to au revoir here. Some cultural smiles that are interesting twists on the smile, right? Being just sort of this very 50s kind of always happy kind of a thing, in our society, right? Uh, the Joker. There are probably a million different
yeah,
cultural, especially in the entertainment world, right? In media and so on. But the Joker, we have many forms of the Joker over the decades, and the smile is it's the will to do crime happily, right? In that Joker, it's a sort of anti-hero, that has a lot of complicated morals and ethics, but it's the opposite of remorse. It's glee. It's glee that's taken in harming other people and harming society. Perhaps the number one smile that has just totally, destroyed your cultural understanding of the smile. Um, Clowns. Pennywise is a nice one right now. It's very timely, right? From It. That's the clown from It. But the clown, the idea of the clown is perfect for this because it as babies, we love clowns, right? As children. Not all children. Some are creeped out by them, but generally they make us laugh. They're happy. They have painted smiles. They're saying funny things. They're doing funny things. They make us smile.
Ronald
But
McDonald.
Ronald McDonald makes us smile until we realize that he's, you know, maybe not what he seems to be. Especially in the 80s and 90s, taking advantage of innocence and vulnerability is what these is almost like what these clowns seem to be doing to us, and then we're captured by them. We're captured by these innocuous smiles, and then we're attacked by them with fear somehow, right? We become afraid of clowns. A lot of people as we get older, right? We're captured by these smiles, and then we learn not to trust the smile for some reason. We lose our innocence and we see all the different layers and all the different shades of the smile. The Guy Fawkes mask. This is sort of a creepy smile. It sort of acknowledges like a silent political pact that you're making with someone that represents, especially in movies like V for Vendetta and other sort of political movements. And then I thought the political smile in general, right? A salesman's smile, a political smile, someone that wants to sell you something, a product or an idea that's not necessarily in your best interest, right? They're using that false impression of kindness and genuinity. And they're trying to assure everyone around them that everything's going to be fine and great and okay. And they're making light out of something that's probably very dark and sinister underneath, perhaps, right? Is it a necessary evil that we need these smiles, right? So those are also very mimetic, and everyone remembers the smiles of presidents and so on, and it's just that's part of our culture. And it was about these questions of why is everyone okay with it, right? Why is everyone okay with a smile that's not genuine? Why do it causes maybe like a repression? Speaking of movies, the Onibaba mask. That's going way back to ancient times in Japan and, samurai times, wartime in Japan. Kaneto Shindo's Onibaba, which is the wonderful Criterion cover of that movie. An amazing movie that, John, you and I think both really love. That's an uncanny mask representation of a demon that's kind of having fun, playing with the minds and emotions of humans. It's pitting them against each other. Right? And that's a cool use of the smile. The Stepford Wives, the perfect little utopian smile, right? Where it couldn't possibly be more sinister underneath, right? It just requires that you buckle up and smile robotically so everyone can see how great and well you are. Whereas really everyone's just incredibly repressed and they're just on the brink of chaos, right? So that's a cool one. And then a couple more. I just thought this was interesting. The American greeting. I've actually heard in the past from other people that Americans smile a lot more than other cultures. Okay? And this is an American movie, of course. So this is another thing I'd love to talk to Parker Finn. Parker, come on the podcast and I'll interview about all this stuff. But the American smile, I don't know if anyone else has heard this or you have, John, but there's this idea that Americans are so friendly sometimes and smile so much that it's very false, right? And non-genuine. And I feel like this movie kind of gets at an American attitude, whether there's something, how much of it is really in the culture or not, or it's just a false sense. I'm not sure, but there is this sense that the American smile is not a genuine one. Right? There's a sense that in other cultures, if you're smiling at someone, there's a real, true, honest reason. And that's why they don't smile all the time, is because there's just this understanding in the culture. Whereas here, we're a little bit more fragmented, right? And we just have to put on this smile. It has to be that mask has to be there so that we can assure everyone that we're okay.
I hear
What do you think
that.
about that?
I definitely notice it. I mean, especially when you travel to places like, when you travel to a place like Japan, like I have,
Mm-hmm.
numerous times. There are certainly differences in dynamics. Um,
Right.
and Americans are generally very like, we're very outwardly friendly on the surface. Um,
Right.
I'm gonna part on that slightly. I think there's
Sure.
certainly there can be an ingenuine nature to the American smile sometimes, but
Mm-hmm.
I think there is a genuine nature in the friendliness of a lot of Americans.
Yeah.
I think
No,
certain
absolutely.
places.
I've just heard this from some people that visit
Oh,
here.
oh yeah, and I don't
Yeah.
disagree. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I think with everything, it requires a bit further, further deeper analysis.
Oh, sure. We
Um,
should do an entire
because I
other
think that we
podcast.
are, yeah, there's a whole 2 hours there on just the social dynamics of the American smile.
Yeah. With Parker Finn. And then my favorite for last, Bob from the Enzyte commercials from the thousands. I don't know if you remember these erectile dysfunction commercials for the pill Enzyte, but Bob
Yeah,
was always smiling. This big, creepy, ridiculous smile. And I just thought that was an interesting that was a meme for a while because people all saw that commercial. They all laughed at it. They loved it. It was very memorable. And Bob just had that biggest, strangest smile, but you remembered it very, very clearly. And it was great advertising because you remembered exactly why he was smiling. And hopefully, I haven't ruined the movie Smile for anyone now. Now that they see the Smile monster, it's just a gigantic orgy that monster just participated in, and that's the real reason that he's getting a little bit too emotional with everyone here. He's just so happy to be stimulated. Um, so, but that concludes our first inaugural podcast of Speaking Cinema. And hopefully, we gave you a nice little bit of a different way to think about Smile. And I would love for everyone, all of the listeners, to comment with your own thoughts on Smile. We would love to talk with you more about it. So, first, what I'd like to do is I'd like to plug you, Jon Bewley. Thank you for coming on the podcast. Where can we find you online so we can see your work and follow you?
yeah, absolutely. So right now you can find me on Instagram primarily. It's just my name. It's Jon Bewley, all one word, and then that also links to my website where you can see some of the latest work that I've done as well. And that's really all I've got for pluggables right now. I'm hoping in the future I can start plugging some more stuff.
Yeah, and I'll try to put links and handles in the description of the podcast episode so that we don't have to worry about that. And I, of course, I'm your host, Andrew Schwartz. You can follow me at www.andrewschwartzfilms, no T in Schwartz.com. And if you would like to comment or have questions at all for me on the Speaking Cinema podcast, you can email me at speakingcinemapodcast@gmail.com. And how I would always like to end, for a main question for all of our wonderful listeners, our illustrious listeners, and our filmy fans out there. The question for this episode is that I would love you to comment on wherever you're hearing this podcast is, what is the single creepiest smile you've ever seen? And what made this smile stay in your mind? I can't wait to see what you guys say about that. So once again, I'd like to thank our guest, Jon Bewley, and to all of you guys for listening and supporting the Speaking Cinema podcast. See you on the next episode.